Yemen, and there are various branches off of it here to the north, one going to Babylon, one going up to Damascus, and one over here to Gaza. What interested us was the Gaza Trail. For that trail passed within 10 miles of the Valley of Lebanon. Now Jeremiah and Ezekiel wrote of the frankincense trade and named towns along that trail. Certainly Lehi, who appears to have been a merchant, would have known about that trail. Now we know that if Lehi had passed through Arabia, he would have had to have taken that trail. He could not have just wandered into Arabia. Why do we know that? Well, number one is water. He had to get access to water. And the reason the trail took that course was because that's where the aquifers were. That's where the wells were found. Now, Lehi could not have just wandered up to a well and started drinking. Those wells were protected by cowls or forts with garrisons. So, within a matter of days in Arabia, Lehi would have had to have gone there and to have gotten water. So people would have known about him. And he had to take the trail because that's where the water was. All the major oases in western Arabia are found along the trail. Food and fodder, supplies for the people and fodder for the camels, of course, were a necessity. At each of those called halts or villages, agricultural communities grew up to provide the food for the travelers on the trail. Again, they became very rich, sort of like the people who supplied the 49ers in California. They're the ones who became wealthy during the gold rush. These people became very wealthy supplying caravans. And of course, fodder for the camels. Camels can go days without water, but they can only go a couple of days without food and then collapse. So they knew they could find fodder at those halts. Also, the trail took the course the way it did because it avoided the mountains. Some might not realize it, but camels cannot travel over mountains. They cannot travel over sand dunes. They have to have flat level courses. They're a very top-heavy animal, and they trail to the course for that reason. You just couldn't wander into Arabia because there are mountains there. Protection from bandits. Jeremiah wrote that the Arabs were notorious highway bandits, robbers. If they stayed on the trail, they'd receive the protection of the tribes as long as they paid tribute. And they'd also, of course, have the protection of being in the forts that were at the wells. And finally, they had to have taken the trail because, believe me, nobody wandered into those Arab countries at that time and just found their own route. Every Bedouin, as I have found, because I've been reported to the police a lot of times by the Bedouins, who have also treated me very well, but every Bedouin is a spy for the local tribe. Okay, if Lehi just wandered into Arabia, his whereabouts would have been known in a day. Arabia, it might be barren, but it's not unpopulated along these trails in that area of Arabia. Now, had Lehi been caught in a tribal land, his family would have been imprisoned, enslaved, the women and children, and he probably would have been executed, as we have many ancient accounts of that having happened. Now, one of the problems with doing our explorations of Lehi's trail is that no one apparently had ever tried to retrace the Gaza branch of the frankincense trail. So we decided we would. That meant I went to the library, I did a lot of research on place names, ancient trail routes. I then gave those to Richard Wellington, who then took the distances and approximate trail routes and located the wells that currently exist, or I should say the wells, ancient wells that are currently known on maps. And he traced those onto TPC maps, which are used by pilots to navigate. And he then reckoned the GPS courses. The next step then was to actually go out into the Arabia and try to locate those. Look at TPC maps, see where the terrain went, and then try to plot where the trail would have been. And that's what we did with our GPSs. How do we know that we were correct? Well, we found all the kellas, we found all the wells. So we're real pleased with that. We're kind of proud of that. Because it was quite an accomplishment, actually. Now, is there any evidence in the Book of Mormon that Lehi took the frankincense trail, the Gaza branch of the frankincense trail? We think so. First of all, it says that they traveled in the borders through Nephi's account of the most fertile parts. And then you don't hear the borders anymore. And we know borders mean mountains. What you find here on the actual trail is that there are mountains at the beginning, and then after Medina, the trail left the mountains and never spoken of again. So Nephi's account is consistent with that. Next, Nephi talks about the fact that they're going through territory that is ever more declining in fertility. He writes about that they traveled many days and they came to the most fertile parts. Then they traveled many days and they came to the more fertile parts. And then they traveled many days and they had to stop and hunt for food. So apparently there was no cultivation in that area because they ever left to hunt for their food. Now this is precisely what you find along the frankincense trail. What Richard and I did, way there at the back, there's a bunch of little blue dots here that indicate where there's cultivation on the TPC maps. What we did is we took all the TPC maps for Saudi Arabia. These are the ones that pilots use. Everywhere it cited cultivation, we put a blue dot. And as you notice along the trail here, we're going from most fertile, more fertile to then places where there's no cultivation. In the northern part of the trail, there's an area of cultivation for every 11 miles. From Medina down to Turba, there's only an area of cultivation every 50 miles. And from Turba down to Najran for every 162 miles. This indicates, again, a decline in fertility. If you take the shoreline route, you find it's just the opposite. You have more barren area here, and the fertility is only in the south. So that's consistent, again, with what we found along the terrain of the Gaza branch of the frankincense trail. And also, the Book of Mormon names of Shazer and most fertile parts are still to be found along the trail today. Can't explain all that, but you want to try Shazer?
Okay, thanks, George. If you remember, when they leave the valley, they travel in a south-southeast direction, travel for 4 days, and they find a place which Lehi calls Shazer. Shazer actually took us 2 years to be able to find, but once we'd found it, we wondered how we'd ever missed it. And what happened was we plotted all the wells around the area of the valley that would have been 4 days' distance and decided to visit them all. And this wasn't proving particularly fruitful until about the same time I started looking at work by Lois Musil, who was a Bohemian who travelled extensively in northern Arabia. And George was looking at Dalal Wahabi's work on the trade routes of Arabia. And we found that they both mentioned a route at the same time. One of them, Musil's, is called the Al-Rasifia, and the Al-Marika is named by Al-Wahabi, which both turn out to be names of the Gaza on the frankincense trail. And they mapped out where the stops were, and this enabled us to be able to look. And we noticed that Ayla is Ezion Gibber, it's Aqaba, the northern end of the trail, which we know Lehi travelled on. The next town is Median, which is Al-Bada, which was only 18 miles from the valley. And we thought, well, if they went to Al-Bada, what would have been the next trail halt that they would have stopped in? And that is called Al-Agra. And so we looked at Al-Agra as a possible site for Shazer. It's 60 miles from the valley. Now, you might say, well, why would it take 4 days if they could do 20 miles a day? But if you remember, they'd been in the valley for a long period of time, and it appears they weren't given any warning to break camp. So we assume that would have taken them at least half a day to do, as they'd been dwelling there for quite a long period of time, and they would have to have set up camp. So the journey could have taken place within a 4-day period and still be consistent with Nephi's account. Now, Shazer, we know, is in the borders near the Red Sea, so we're looking for a place which is still in the mountains. And let me just run over there in the trail. We've had them travelling in the wilderness. This is the wilderness of where John the Baptist preached, down the way of the wilderness. travelling to the valley here, and this is the Gardrama, the frankincense trail. And so we think they would have headed here, and at this point is Albada, or Midian, where Jethro was the high priest. And then the trail, which I'll show you some photos of in a moment, runs along the west side of the mountains, and then takes a turn into the mountains just here. And this is